Welcome to Good Grief, the podcast where resilience meets reality. I'm your host, Dr. Christine Malone. In this podcast, we delve deep into the stories of individuals who've triumphed over tragedy, adversity, and trauma. In every episode, we bring you raw and honest narratives from guests who faced life's most challenging moments head on. Through candid conversations, they share their journeys of resilience, shedding light on the strategies, mindset shifts, and support systems that empowered them to rise above their darkest hours. Join us as we explore the profound depths of human resilience and discover how, even in the face of life's toughest trials, there can be light, growth, and yes, good grief. Okay, listeners, thank you so much for joining me for my episode today. My guest is Amy Pickett Williams. Amy, she's a seasoned psychotherapist with over 25 years of experience in grief and loss. Her career began in oncology and pediatric care, where she provided compassionate support to patients and families navigating the challenges of illness and death. As she transitioned into community mental health, Amy broadened her focus to address various forms of loss, ranging from death and illness to relationship breakdowns, identity shifts, financial struggles, loss of sense, safety, peace, and more. This holistic approach has led her to open her private practice, where she integrates somatic tools and therapies inspired by her study of yoga and mind, body, spirit healing. Amy's also the founder of the Light Movement, which we'll talk about today. So, Amy, if you would please just tell us a bit about your story.
I would be honored to. So, as it said in the bio, I've been providing grief counseling for 25 years. And started out working in the cancer world, and then it morphed. And during my career, my dad, who was an education attorney and spoke nationally on mandated reporting, which is making sure kids are safe, preventing school violence, and his last big hurrah was to ensure transgender youth had safe public restrooms in public schools. Well, he didn't finish that. Unfortunately, he died. But he always spoke very, very full of knowledge to be able to support people in this area and to hopefully make change. And so during my career, he would always say, Amy, you should speak to your work with the grief and loss and death and dying. And I always said, Dad, I'm a therapist. I'm a one-on-one type person. I have a practice, private practice. But he said, Amy, you have something to share. And I didn't really listen because I thought I was enjoying what I enjoyed. Well, tragically, in the fall of 2020, we were camping during COVID. Our youngest son had some major health issues, so we had to be very, very, very careful during that time. And my parents owned an RV, and they went to return the RV in their storage place. And unfortunately, a big gust of wind hit my dad while he was closing the gate, and he ended up landing on his head and ended up with a brain bleed. And about 2 days later, we had to withdraw life support. So that was really, really hard for our family, especially my oldest son at the time, who considered my dad his hero and his mentor. And so through COVID, obviously, we were working with our own personal grief, trying to reintegrate our experiences. And our youngest son, as soon as he was vaccinated, we were able to get them back to some sort of what would be normalcy, right? Up until that time, I got to homeschool much longer than I ever expected, over 2 years. So that was another added little stressor as I tried to balance a private practice and caring for my mom. So finally, in the spring last year, my husband and I got a weekend away, and my mom said she'd watch our kids. And we went to Ojo Caliente, which is outside of Taos, New Mexico. And there are these beautiful hot springs. And there was this beautiful trail just outside the hot springs. And my husband, being the rock climber and mountaineer that he is, said, let's go for a hike. And I said, sure, let's go. So we started up a steep, steep mesa. And I remember commenting to him, this is going to be really hard to go down. And so he said, we'll be fine. And he said, do you want me to lead at all? And I said, no, it happened to be my birthday. And I said, no, I'm going to lead this. This is my birthday. And so we made it up to the top of the mesa, and there was a beautiful mica mine. And I don't know if you've ever seen mica, but it's like shimmering diamonds. And so we'd be crunching on these shimmering diamonds just outside the mine. And it was absolutely breathtaking. But eventually came the time for us to start heading down. And so we started heading down the trail, and about a third of the way down this trail, down where the mesa kind of started, there was a very, very steep section. And there was this juniper tree strutting out in the path. And so I held onto the juniper tree. It helped me down. I turned to the tree, being the vegan and the hippie that I am, gave the tree a hug and said, I know you have helped a lot of people. My husband, not being the vegan and the hippie, said, yes, Amy, I'm sure this tree has helped a lot of people. Well, fast forward to the last part of the hike, the steepest section. My husband once again said, do you want me to lead? And I said, no, no, no. This is my birthday. I'm leading this hike. And we started down the path and I tripped and I fell over 40 feet.
Ooh.
I ended up with 600 cactus spines in my body. I ended up with a fractured tibia. The only thing I remember about the fall is at one point hitting my head and saying, oh my God, I'm not ready to die like my dad did. It's the only thing I remember. But eventually I stopped, and my husband, through adrenaline, somehow made it down to me, basically, this mesa, which was in many ways like a cliff. And he got to my side, and, obviously he was terrified. I was very dazed. I was definitely in that sympathetic response in our nervous system. And we gradually started to head down the mesa. And my husband said, thank God you stopped when you did. You should have fallen 100 feet and I would have been dead. But you can only guess what stopped me. It was another juniper tree.
Mm.
So it's now my sacred tree, my spirit tree. And so we rushed to the hospital. And we get to the hospital. I was terrified I had a brain bleed like my dad. And so we did not tell my mom or our 3 kids until we had some scans and MRI. And the good news is I did not have a brain bleed. They just said you have a severe concussion. And they checked and they said you also have a fractured tibia. You'll have to get back to Denver. It's not urgent. And they said you'll be pulling cactus spines out for the next year of your life. So let duct tape become your friend. So my husband, they finally let us be discharged. And my husband went to get the car and I was waiting in the waiting room. And when he came back to get me, unfortunately, I had fully passed out. My eyes were fully dilated. And my husband was once again terrified. He thought now I died, twice in a day. And they decided to readmit me. Fortunately, no extra copay. Thank you. And they readmitted me and they said, maybe she has a belly bleed. And it turns out I did not have a belly bleed, but it turns out they found a mass in my belly. They said, you need to get back to Denver and you need to get that checked out ASAP. So we drive back to Denver. And with visiting with different doctors and specialists, it turned out I had cancer. So that juniper tree saved my life twice.
Yeah.
Some people say the cactus saved my life. I'd rather go with the juniper tree that didn't harm me in any way. So anyway, in my recovery, I finally had the time to listen to my dad. My dad's voice kept coming back to me and saying, Amy, this is your time. Before when we were struggling, when I was a younger in my career and I had 3 children, I would, my husband or my father would suggest you should do this. And I couldn't listen because I was too busy and I wasn't interested. But I started to listen to him during that time. And that would have been last summer. And so in the September of this last year, and the September is very significant. So exactly a year ago, I decided to get a group of volunteers together because I listened to my dad. And on the winter solstice, we planned it for December 21st. We would hold an event that would teach these tools that I'd learned for so long in all of these years, specifically somatic-based tools, which are mind, body, or for some people, mind, body, spirit, to help them understand, people to understand that we hold grief in our bodies. And in order to work with our grief and grow with our grief, we needed to work with our bodies through different tools that I'd learned for years being a psychotherapist and a yoga teacher. So we had this beautiful event and we brought together as many faith representatives as we possibly could because we believed in standing in solidarity for all people and all types of loss. Now, going back, September is significant because we started planning this in September, and then the horror on the other side of the world happened with Gaza and Israel.
Yeah.
And so while we'd invited all these faith representatives, all of a sudden we didn't know if that would work. But the beauty of this movement and this night was that they did come together. We had Muslim representatives, Jewish, Christian, Buddhist, Native American, as many as we could bring together. And we offered a ritual around, just with candles, and it was not religiously based at all, but it was the point of standing in solidarity. And thus the Light movement was formed. Light stands for love and grief held together. So we all know that when we experience grief, we experience love and or an intense attachment to something or someone. So love and grief are together, which fits with the held together. But the other part of the held together is that we have to support each other in our grief. And so that's how the Light movement came. And I believe my dad gave me those words. So we had this beautiful event. And about 2 weeks later, probably mid-January, my dad's voice came back and he said, Amy, I don't think you're done. And so this group of volunteers plus more, we worked really, really hard to form a nonprofit. We recently got our 501c3 status. And our goal is to be able to teach these tools globally in many different ways. One is to provide somatic-based classes. And somatic, as I was sharing earlier, is body-based. So while yoga is a big thing for me, it may not be a big thing for everyone else. So we do offer gentle yoga classes, but we also currently offer a sketching class. And in the next month, anything that's movement-based is part of our nonprofit. So we have someone that's going to lead somatic hiking. We have others that are interested in doing journaling and painting, and even, and I'll speak to this a little more with tools, even singing and humming help with that somatic piece due to the vagus nerve, which I know we'll talk about in a little bit. But before I get there, we decided to offer those classes. We also decided to offer a grief retreat and a burnout retreat, and also a training that's in October. There we have continuing ed credits for mental health providers, including psychologists and social workers and LPCs. It was a big deal for us to get these CEs and nurses. And our goal is to be able to teach these tools. People can get continuing ed credits if they want them. And then we have a social justice lens. And what that means is that when someone learns these tools and they say, I want to bring classes to my community, we hope they morph it to what works for them and their culture. So if it's a teacher in Africa, they may say, Amy, these tools were great. This science was great. And where I live, I'm wondering if I could morph it into this. And the answer is yes. We want it to fit with where people are. So we decided to do the classes, the retreat, the workshops, and of course our solstice event will continue. And last year, our first go at it, we had almost 200 people in person and almost 500 people view it online. Wow. We hope it's exponentially bigger. And we had people tune in all over the world for it, which was just so incredible.
That is really cool.
That's our hope. Thank you.
I think I told you my show has listeners in 43 countries, so maybe we'll pick somebody up who'll want to join you for your event as well.
That would be beautiful.
Your classes then, so I kind of think I know the answer to this. Are they for people for their own self-help as well as people who would want to take those tools back to help others? Is that kind of what the design is?
Yeah, so the training is a lot for people that want to bring it to others. However, we have some people signed up that just say, I want to better understand this from my own experience. And in reality, we all experience loss. It's the universal, right, experience. And then the classes, the weekly classes that we'll be building more and more, including virtual ones, are for anyone that's needing some tender care to better support them in their grieving journey. With the goal, and I know you obviously know this, is that we don't heal from grief, but we can grow from our grief. So the idea is the grief will always be there. The scar will always be there. But with these tools and the education around it, we will continue to grow from that experience. The scar will be there, but ideally like a tree, a lightning strike on a tree, our tree will continue to grow. Yeah. And so that's our goal. And then the last part I'll share about the Light movement is we have 4 goals. And it's only 4. The first is to remind people that they're not alone in their grief. The second is to teach these somatic-based tools to support integration and finding purpose. And there's one piece that I think is really important to share. Our nonprofit does not state that things happen for a reason. That's not what we personally want to strive for. We do know that some people in religious backgrounds do believe that. But when we say finding purpose, it's what do we do now once we've integrated our experience? The third goal is to connect with other resources like podcasts to be able to get our message out and different nonprofits. And the fourth one is what I spoke to earlier, is to stand in solidarity for all people and all types of loss.
Yeah. Wow. That's a big chunk there. So can you tell us a bit, just kind of an overview of what your tools are all about, kind of how they work?
Yeah. So somatic means body. And what we know is we hold grief in our body. And while we also know that grief lights up many parts of our brain, it also is held in our body. I mean, a prime example, and I can never say it because it's Japanese, but is the broken heart syndrome. And there people that experience the death of a significant other are 2 times more likely to have a heart attack within the first couple months of that death. So we know the body holds it. And we know that if we don't work with our grief, the cortisol levels will grow exponentially, and it can contribute to, it's important for me to say it's not going to cause, but it can contribute to cancer, diabetes, other inflammatory diseases. And so if it's held in our body, that means we need to work with our body in order to be able to grow from the experience and hopefully continue on in our lives, knowing it will always be a part of us, but it may not be impacting us as much. So there's a couple ways we can work with somatics. One is integrating both sides of the body and both sides of the brain through bilateral stimulation, which can be going for a walk. It can be going for a swim or a hike, or yoga is a great example where we do one side and then we do the other. Other examples are contraction and expansion. We can expand our arms out with heart opening, where we can feel more vulnerable and able to share what we're experiencing. And in the same breath, in that exhale, we may close up and recognize that at times we have to close up. But the pendulating is the part that's so important with somatic growth. And then the third big piece, Dr. Stephen Porges came up with something called polyvagal theory. And that is really related to our vagus nerve, which is our 10th cranial nerve. And it's known as the bidirectional highway, which means it goes 20% brain-ish, 20% brain to body communicating, but 80% body communication to brain. And so while talking, it serves a purpose. It does. And I was trained as a talk therapist. What we really know is that 80% of the work has to come from our body. And so if we can stimulate the vagus nerve, it can help us get into that more calming place. And speaking of that part, what is calming place? So Dr. Daniel Siegel came up with something called the window of tolerance. It's when we're in our place of like, we're able to use our thinking brain, we're able to be in the present moment, we're able to socially engage. And he came up with that theory, which is a beautiful theory. And he talked about that sympathetic, which is when we go to that fight flight, which is where we go above our window and we're not functioning well. And then we can go to that lower state, which is that hypoarousal, where we don't feel like we're doing so well. But then Dr. Stephen Porges really added on to that. And he said that lower place, he believes, is called the dorsal phase, which is basically that dissociative place, that place where we're immobile. And when we experience grief, much of the time, we either go way above the window where we're in that fight flight, like beyond terrified that something horrible happened, angry, overwhelmed. And so it's way above that window and we're not functioning well. And we go back and forth, we go below the window where we're immobile. I don't want to get out of bed. I can't function every single day. And so part of the idea of polyvagal theory is, one, how do we get back into that window? One way what Dr. Porges talks about is stimulating that vagus nerve. But just as importantly, we also have to learn how to grow our window. So if I have a client in my private practice that just experienced a significant loss of any type, a lot of times they'll come in and I realize their emotions are all over the place. And so their window of calm and at peace may be the size of a little dollhouse window or an attic window. And so I can work with them and teaching these tools to support them and really be intentional about them. Ideally, eventually, maybe their window will expand to the size of a sliding glass door. So they'll ride the roller coaster, but they may not be hopping outside that window in that sympathetic state or that dorsal state all of the time. And then when they maybe experience another loss, because tragically we all do, we experience loss after loss, sometimes really significant ones, sometimes ones that don't feel so significant. We know loss triggers loss triggers loss. So if we can buffer some of that with our bigger window, it can help us.
Yeah.
So I know I just covered a lot of
Oh, it's
information.
fascinating. I'm absolutely fascinating. I'm curious, how do you feel like your own personal grief experiences have kind of led to, the mission or the vision or whatever for the light movement?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say for me, we live in the beautiful state of Colorado, which I know is very similar to Washington in many ways, except for we're not as wet. But we have the beautiful outdoors. And so going outside and walking and hiking has always helped me. I'm also a yoga teacher, and I will say yoga was so significant in influencing me in my own work with grief experience, being able to integrate it and then being able to share it.
No, I can see that. I know a lot of people that I talk to that start something as big as what you're doing. It usually started from a seed that was within themselves. It wasn't like I picked this idea out of
Mhm.
nowhere. It's something that happened to them or is still happening to them, or in your case, dad talking to you. So, there's that as well. So I'm curious, when people have finished the training, let's say I'm doing it for myself. I want to learn how to deal with things myself. I've gone through the training. What would I expect? I'm obviously, as we've already talked about, I'm not going to get past or get, the grief is not going to go away. I still have that scar, but what am I going to be able to learn or be able to do after that?
Yeah. So the training one in October, and we'll offer it again, I'm sure in the spring, is one, learning more about the science of grief. How do we hold grief in our bodies and our brains? And then the second piece is now how do we find these tools to support us? Ideally, it will all help every single one of us personally doing this training, right? And then for some, it may help them professionally to help others. And we have this beautiful system because we really believe in paying it forward. Obviously, we have to survive a bit as a nonprofit, and we just got hit with a $13,000 insurance bill. So we need to get some money, obviously, too, because right now we're all volunteers. But our hope is that we have this tuition tiered system where if someone wants to pay the full amount and get the CEs, that's great. That will help our nonprofit, right? But many people can pay less, like 20% off, and they volunteer for 8 hours during light. And so going to your question, or let me just say, or 16 hours and it's 40% off. So going to your question, what can they do about it? We hope they bring some of these tools and form classes in their communities. And ideally, as they're volunteering for light, then the people that take these classes that are always donation based. So you don't have to pay, but any of that money will come back into light so we can continue these programmings. So our hope is, we get teachers that take this training and then they say to their students, hey, let's do this tool. There's been a lot of awful stuff going on, including a recent school shooting, right? And again, another one. And guys, I know everyone is feeling really anxious and scared and sad. Maybe we could take a few moments today before we start our history lesson and do these breathing techniques or this humming with the humming, the vibration of the vagus nerve. Actually, as a matter of fact, if you want, you can just put your hand on your throat and just start humming gently. And you can feel your vagus nerve.
Yeah.
So that's our hope is that people will integrate these body-based tools to support themselves and support the community and ultimately support our world.
Yes, I love it. So what kind of feedback have you received from former students, people who've gone through your training?
Yeah, one was an interesting story. I was just sharing this with somebody else. I presented to a Parkinson's group. There were about 70 people there. This is about a month ago. And they were caregivers or their patient with the person with Parkinson's and their caregiver. And at first, they all kind of looked at me a little blankly. And afterwards, the feedback was, you started out the presentation, and I said to myself, I can't relate to this because I haven't died. But then, and they started working with the president and hearing the workshop, they were like, wow, I have experienced a lot of loss. The loss of my independence, the loss of my health. The caregivers are like, we are not able to do what we used to do together. And so it was this profound moment of recognizing that I'm holding this loss in my body, even if my thinking brain didn't realize it. And now there's some tools I can use to support me with it.
Yeah.
So what the profound mission that we would hoped had happened is happening. People will attend a class or they'll listen to a workshop and they'll say, oh, wow. I've had some participants after a class say, a lot of emotion came up because I happen to do yoga classes and, we have other classes as well. And when we were doing these really gentle poses, I started to really feel, is that normal? And I said, of course it's normal. I said, and what did you do with it? And they said, I let myself feel it.
Yeah. You know what? Of course, I'm all about my perfect world theory. What would be awesome is if we had our Western healthcare practitioners learn these things to help their patients. Because I think a lot of Western medicine is more about, medicating, things that are, yes, you can help me in the short term, but how do I get to a place where I'm actually doing some healing rather than just, bandage, I guess is what I would say. But, I guess that's got to come in a different place once these things take and start rolling. We are definitely going to link in the podcast notes your website so that our listeners can find you and find out more about you and what it is you're doing with this light movement, which is absolutely fascinating. I have a quick question for you, though, that maybe somebody else might like the answer to. I actually was in a car accident several years ago, then broke my wrist and can no longer put weight on my hand. So yoga doesn't work for me unless I do something without my palm of my hand. So is there, because I really did I enjoyed yoga. I enjoyed what I got from it, but it's like, and that's a loss for me. It's like, I can't do that anymore. So what do you have people do, or what do you suggest people do that can't do traditional yoga?
Well, I'm going to just correct you. You can do yoga because yoga is even breath work. Doing that longer exhale is a breath tool in yoga. Square breathing, stair step breath. I mean, there's straw breath where you breathe in slowly through your nose and out through your mouth like you're blowing through a straw. That's yoga, right? Vibrations, humming, that also is a part of yoga. It's other things too, right? And so even the contraction and expansion of like opening up your cactus arms where your shoulders are parallel to your elbows, breathing in and then slowly coming back down and then back and forth. That's yoga. And in my Wednesday morning class, it is virtual as well. It's in person and virtual. Usually half of them are in chairs and the other half do mats.
Okay. Because I know you're probably not going to be surprised to hear this. I liked yoga so much, and when I could no longer use the palm of my left hand, it would make me angry to think about yoga. It'd make me mad. I'm like, well, I can't do it anymore. That guy took it away from me by ramming into my car and breaking my wrist. So it's kind of like to think about it. There's other things you can do where you aren't going to have to experience, the inability to put pressure on the palm of your hand, which I realize is not a big disability, but it's just one of those things where it's like to know there's other things you can do too. I love the thought of that. I'm definitely going to look into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously honoring that loss because it's a huge transition because it was something you did love.
Yeah.
And absolutely a downward dog can feel great, right?
Yeah.
It can be intense. It can cause some discomfort, hopefully not pain, but you can't do that anymore. And it's important to honor that loss. And maybe when you did do your first yoga class since then, that's not, obviously you're not going to be doing downward dog or placing your hands in, you may have some emotion that comes up, right? That grief when everyone else, other people in the class might be doing that. And instead, maybe you're on a chair and you're leaning your forward with your belly dropped for cow pose, and then going into cat, which is a lot of times what I'll do with people in a chair. There might be some sadness there. And of course there is. That's us.
Yeah, no, for sure. I know I actually had a yoga instructor tell me I could use the fifths, be on my fists or whatever. And I tried that. Didn't work really well for me, but I thought, okay, something else has got to give here. But or
even forearms, you can do some stuff on forearms.
That's true. Well, I appreciate you being my guest today, Amy. Is there anything else you would like to share before we finish?
I don't think so. I so appreciate you sharing our website and letting people know about it and potentially taking our training. I'm going to put a plug in for donations too, just so we can survive as a nonprofit. Yep. We were, like I said, we were hit with that bill that we were like, wow, we had no idea.
The government and everybody always wants their share, whether they're, anyway, I won't get into that. It's a different episode, but thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Good Grief. We hope that stories shared today have inspired and empowered you on your own journey of resilience. If you want to dive deeper into the themes of trauma, tragedy, and survival, be sure to check out my memoir, The Day I Became the Spider Killer, a memoir of trauma, tragedy, and survival. In this book, I shared my own raw and honest experiences, offering insights and strategies for overcoming life's toughest challenges. You can purchase the book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or listen to it on Audible. Your support helps us continue to bring these powerful stories to light and spread a message of hope and resilience. Stay tuned for more incredible stories on our next episode. Until then, remember, even in the face of life's toughest trials, there can be light, growth, and good grief.